That was our first gift, and now we have another one. Take a breath, kind of settle that in. You ready? This is Michael Dowd. I've heard his name for a long, long time. And I don't really have a big bio introduction for you. I want to start with a clean palette and let Michael tell you who he is, what he does, and what his story is today with us. His books are out in the lobby and information that you can take with you after today. And I encourage you to come to his workshop this afternoon from 1 to 3. Trust me, you'll want to be there. Michael.
Thanks, Lynn. I figured since I heard them the first service, I wouldn't have all the emotions. I was wrong. Thank you again. I'd like to speak this morning on the sacred side of science and how what God, what reality is revealing to us evidentially, that is through evidence, global collective intelligence, how that can inspire us to have healthier lives, healthier relationships, and work together with people of very different backgrounds and beliefs to do what we can to ensure a just, healthy, beautiful, and sustainably life-giving future. Little background for those of you that aren't familiar with my ministry. My wife, Connie Barlow, is a science writer. She's written 4 acclaimed science books. I pastored 3 churches over the course of a decade, although I've only recently been wearing this clergy shirt. I'll describe this green clergy shirt here in a little bit. But we've been living all over North America for the last 14 years. We've literally been traveling the continent for 14 years. We don't have a home. We don't have an apartment. We live out of the generosity of people who open up their homes to us. And the first 8 years, every 3 to 7 days, we were in somebody else's home, sharing their kitchen, occupying their guest bedroom, speaking 2 or 3, 4 times a week. The last 5, 6 years, we now have a state-by-state file of people who have offered us a second home or vacation home. So now we're typically in somebody's house, not for 3 to 7 days with them there, but for 3 to 7 weeks without them there. And we're speaking maybe 3 to 5 times a month on average, rather than 3 or 4 times a week. And it's a slower pace, it's soul-nourishing. And what we do is we've spoken to about 2,000 groups across North America, literally from atheists to evangelicals and everything in between. In fact, 6 years ago, I did a program at the United Nations called Evolution and the Global Integrity Crisis. Michael Shermer at Skeptic Magazine wanted me to do that exact program to a group of 350 humanists and atheists down in Southern California, which I did. Exactly a week after that, I gave the same exact program at Michael Beckwith's Agape Spiritual Life Center. Okay. 2 weeks after that at a Catholic church, and 2 weeks after that at an evangelical church. Now, Catholics, evangelicals, atheists, and New Thought and United Nations are 5 radically different populations, and yet the exact same program worked for all settings. And I think it's because what Connie and I focus on is the sacred side of science. In other words, what God, reality, is revealing through evidence, through global collective intelligence, that can help all of us be inspired in the face of really challenging stuff, so that we can be a blessing to others who are freaking out because they may have never been exposed to the kinds of groundedness that we get in New Thought circles, Centers for Spiritual Living, where we know that our thoughts actually co-create our experience of reality. So that when the compost hits the fan, because see, that's what so many people think. They have got a mistaken notion of religious science and Center for Spiritual Living and New Thought. They think that if you just have the right beliefs, if you just have the right affirmations, then the universe is kind of like a slot machine, and you get it, right? There we go. It's not that, as you've probably learned. Right? What New Thought is about is that when we have the right heart set and the right mindset, we can be present to whatever's real, including challenging times, in a way that's a blessing to ourselves, our relationships, and those who maybe are just hearing this for the first time or just dealing with this for the first time. One of my favorite quotes, Robert Louis Stevenson famously said, "Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences." Uh-oh, right, exactly, uh-oh. Because reality, it doesn't matter whether you believe in reality or not. Reality just is. Reality is the great I am. Reality is what we call the universe, and then whatever is that transcendent mystery that brought the universe into being. Reality includes nature. Reality includes time. Reality includes mystery. And so whatever else the word God is pointing to, it can't be pointing to less than the face of time, the voice of nature, the voice of mystery. So what does it mean to live in right relationship to reality? I mean, every species has to do that or it goes extinct. Well, the same is true for humans. We need to live in right relationship to reality. The problem is we've been living out of right relationship to reality for some time now. And there are consequences. Let me describe my cosmic rosary here. I've got 270 of the major transformational moments in the history of the universe represented in beads. Each bead signifies some significant event in the universe story. From the very beginning to the present moment, don't worry, I'm not going to do it, but I can tell the whole story, bead by bead. And one of the things that this reminds me of, I mean, I grew up Catholic. You can't get the Catholic out of me, right? So this is my cosmic rosary. Right? So one of the things that this reminds me of is how profoundly interrelated, interconnected, and how big and old we are. We're about 70% water, H2O. We're about, like if I was hollow and you filled me up, I'd be about this much with water. It's amazing we don't slosh around when we walk, right? And so the hydrogen atoms, the H2O, those hydrogen atoms are 13.8 billion years old. All the hydrogen atoms in your body are 13.8 billion years old. You are a lot older than you thought you were. So stop trying to hide your age. Celebrate your age, because you're a heck of a lot older than you thought you were anyway. Right? But we're also bigger. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. The universe as a whole has gone from simple atoms to more complex atoms, to molecules, to more complex molecules, to creatures, to more complex creatures, to societies, and more complex societies. And it's one unfolding, emergent process that we grow out of in the same way that apples grow out of an apple tree. We're not separate from the universe. We are the universe after some 13.8 billion years of unbroken creativity that the universe in this solar system became complex enough that the universe could begin to contemplate its own nature. We are nature uncovering its own nature. We're the universe becoming aware of itself. A human being looking through a telescope is the universe looking at itself and going, whoa. A biology student looking through a microscope is the planet Earth learning with awareness, with consciousness, how it's functioned unconsciously and instinctually for billions of years. Brian Swim is a professor of cosmology out in California. He's worked very closely with my main mentor, Thomas Berry. He just sort of helps people sort of get this in a nutshell. He says, 4 billion years ago, the earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Planet Earth was once molten rock, and now it sings opera. And nobody put anything here. When the Bible, like Genesis 2:7, speaks of God forming us from the dust of the ground and breathing into us the breath of life, it's a true story. It's a mythic or sacred way of describing the fact that we grew out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's God, reality with a personality, that makes that possible. I don't know how Moses could have said it any other way, assuming he wrote that. Now, here's another quote from Brian Swim that I think you'll like, although it's a little audacious. He tries to take the entire 13.8 billion year history of the universe and sum it up in 2 sentences. He says, you take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone, and it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. Now, if that's not a sacred story, this is what science gives us. This is what's called big history. It's the history of everyone and everything, revealed through evidence. This is the sacred side of science. So what we're learning is that God isn't just, God didn't just speak in the distant past, frozen in time in some ancient books. God doesn't speak just through old men. That God speaks through every fact. Facts are God's native tongue, and trends are God's bullhorn. And so when we realize this, we realize that all these discoveries that we've been making about our inner nature, our outer nature, our social nature, and our interpretive nature, these discoveries are all divine revelation. They all are God's revealing truth to us. And the main thing that's God's been revealing recently is what we need to do to align our laws, our medicine, our politics, our economics, our education with the way life works so that we can move into a just, healthy, sustainably life-giving future, a beautiful future. It's all about coming home to reality. It's coming home to God. See, we are indeed in the early stages of the Great Reckoning, where we've been out of right relationship to reality, and we're now about to experience consequences of biblical proportion. But it's also the great homecoming. Humanity, the prodigal species, we've squandered our inheritance. We're waking up to our predicament, in the pig pen, as it were, and coming home to God, to reality. And so that's what I'll be sharing in more depth, these 10 commandments. I'm not channeling an otherworldly entity, and I'm not predicting the future. And I'm not even saying that I believe that God is telling us these things. I'm saying you check your heart, and you tell me if you don't think that this is what reality is telling us. These 10 commandments, you could call them reality's rules. These are the rules for living so that we humans can live with the same kind of integrity that gazelle and buffalo and hawks and like all the rest of the other creatures do. They don't struggle with how to live in right relationship to reality. They just do it or they die or go extinct. Because we have words, because we use this language, this symbolic language, we can have our thinking can either be out of right relationship to reality, or our thinking can help us live in a more intimate, I-thou, personal relationship, intimate relationship with the reality. The problem is religion has been asleep at the wheel for the last few hundred years because of what I call the triple idolatries. Idolatry of the written word, which is where we think God's best guidance is frozen in time somewhere in the distant past. Idolatry of the otherworldly, which is where we think where God exists is outside time and nature, the supreme landlord who resides off the planet and outside the universe, who blesses some and smites others, who's for this football team but not that football team. I know I'm on dangerous territory there. Yeah. This is a trivial notion. So this is idolatry of the written word, idolatry of the otherworldly, and idolatry of beliefs, where we think what religion is all about is having beliefs. Beliefs are important, for sure. Our beliefs co-create our experience of reality. But God's been revealing truth through knowledge for hundreds of years, and yet we haven't been giving God glory. That is, we haven't been honoring the whole of reality and using that knowledge to help us live in right relationship to reality. Specifically, the reality of the soil, the reality of the forests, the reality of other species, the reality of the water, and the reality of the atmosphere, the climate upon which we depend utterly. No force in the history of the universe has more consistently brought civilizations into being, sustained civilizations, and brought civilizations to their demise than climate. There are 24 examples in human history of societies becoming complex and then declining. Societies and civilizations have a life cycle just like we do. We're children, we have our power years, we get older and we die. Well, so do civilizations. And it's only in the dying phases of civilizations that new systems get to be created. And so I just want to share very briefly two things that God has revealed, that reality has revealed through evidence, through science, that can now inspire us because we're going to see things break down. Not like a collapse like this, but just a decline where every decade is a little bit tougher than the previous ones. I mean, this is, we talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire. The collapse of the Roman Empire took 325 years. There were partial, things got a little better. It did this for 325 years. Now, we have climate change and other things that are contributing more rapidly, but that chaos can actually be the cauldron of creativity. We can actually see positive transformation happen faster, because we can communicate globally. We've got technology that helps us do that. Also, many of us have done the work in our hearts, and we realize that we co-create our experience by how we interpret reality. And we also are being filled with a passion for being a blessing to the future. All cultures have known this. Good, bad, great, and evil, these fundamental moral categories, have always, in every culture, been defined by how we impact others and how that ripples out to the future. If I do something helpful and kind to others in the future, I've done a good thing. If I harm others or harm the future, I've done a bad thing. If I sacrifice to be a blessing to others in the future, I've done a great thing or a heroic thing. But if I self-centeredly serve my own needs, screw others. To hell with the future. I've done an evil thing. This is not moral rocket science. We don't need 10 commandments to tell us this. So we have an economic system. This is what I mean when I said religion has been asleep at the wheel. We have an economic system that defines progress by how fast we can take nature and turn it into pollution, rewarding the few at the expense of the many, and forcing billions of us to harm the future just by pursuing the good life. It's crazy. It's actually, when I speak in certain Christian studies, I say it's demonic. If the word demonic has any meaning in a modern world, it's got to apply to a system that makes it easy or inevitable for millions of good people to harm the future, to betray the future. So we're seeing the contraction of this. We're seeing the collapse of that, and that's actually a good thing. I call myself an apocalyptimist. I'm an apocalyptimist. Here's the stance of an apocalyptimist. We are screwed. Thank God. Right? Because we're at this incredible time in human history where we get to co-create, especially those of us that have done the inner work in our hearts and our thinking and our interpretation. We get to be a blessing because we get to co-create a system that brings two things into being, just two things. In fact, all the 10 commandments that I'll be sharing this afternoon really boil down to these two fundamental things that if we do this, we can move into a just, healthy, and sustainably life-giving future. We can realize, R-E-A-L capital, realize, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is, we can realize what it is for humans to come into right relationship to God and for thousands of years into the future. Live in that way. The two things are this. One is unfortunately, we have measures of progress and success and growth that are human-centered rather than God-centered or life-centered or ecocentric. So it's shifting our measures of progress, growth, and success rather than simply human-centered ways of understanding that to life-centered ways. So that if the soil is getting healthier, like building topsoil, we can do that. So if the soil is getting better and better decade by decade, that's progress. The idea that we can have growing human progress when the natural world is getting worse and worse, this is crazy. So restoring wetlands, reforesting, building topsoil, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, getting off coal, oil, and natural gas as rapidly as possible, and basically powering things by sustainable technologies. Wind, solar, geothermal, others. Yes, there'll be aspects that we need fossil fuels too, but we can rapidly, within 10 or 15 years, it's possible for us to wean off of these incredibly toxic things. So one is defining progress and success in life-centered ways. This is a fundamental shift that when we do that, we will instinctually do what it takes to move into a healthy future, because we'll basically be having progress that's aligned with God's understanding of progress. That is nature's understanding of progress and success. So that's the first thing, is redefining what we mean by progress and success and growth from not human-centered, but life-centered. And we will thrive in that context. It's really shifting the basic metaphor of who we think we are. I did about, probably 20 years ago, I was doing a program. This is before I even met my wife, Connie Barlow. I was doing a program, and I was talking about that, we are the universe becoming conscious of itself and all this kind of cool stuff. And this one woman raised her hand. She said, if we're the universe becoming aware of itself, why are we destroying the air, water, soil, and life upon which we depend? I didn't have a good response. And fortunately, there was a young man. He was in his mid-30s, but I found out later that he was a Peruvian doctor. He was a doctor in Peru studying, doing postgraduate work here. And he raised his hand real vigorously. And he said, can I respond to that? I was like, go for it, He said, let me describe in layperson's terms. He says, a cancer cell is a normal cell that, for a variety of reasons, gets cut off or disconnected from its genetic memory. It starts thinking it's separate from the body. And then cancer consumes the body of which it's a part. And he said, what do we call our society? We call it a consumer society, right? What does to consume mean? It means to eat up. Why are we eating up the planet? Is it because we're bad, rotten, evil, crummy, sinful people? Or is it because, like the cancer, we thought we were separate from the planet? We didn't know that we were Earth becoming conscious of itself, that we are nature, that our genetic divine coding goes back billions of years. And it's like the cancer cell getting reconnected to its genetic wisdom so that we can then live in harmonious relationship with the body of life of which we're a part. So he said, the metaphor that I like, he said, and this has stuck with me and I've shared it with audiences ever since. He said, the metaphor that I like is the vision of humans becoming an immune system where we protect and foster and defend the health and the well-being of the body of life of which we're a part. And that is a future that we can thrive into. We have no future 100 or even 1,000 years from now if we continue to act like a cancer in the body of life. We can have a future for tens of thousands, maybe millions of years into the future if we become an immune system. And so that's this incredible time that we're living in. And we now have crystal clear guidance. That's what I'll be sharing at 1 o'clock. It won't go till 3 o'clock. It'll be from 1 to about 2:30. And there's no cost. I mean, it's all just free will love offering at the end if you find value in it. I purposely asked them to not have any cost because I want as many people to come as possible. Because these 10 commandments, again, it's reality giving us guidance for how to move into a healthy future. So the first thing is redesigning or redefining what we mean by progress and success in terms of life-centered. The second one is related to that, which is for 98% of human history, when we lived in tribes and bands, right? If you had a positive impact on the community, you were blessed. There was self-esteem. The people were great to you, right? And if you had a negative impact on your community, there were consequences. There was accountability. And if it was severe enough, you'd be shunned. There were ways of bringing people back into right relationship to reality. But once we started having city-states of 10,000 or more, people could have a negative impact, and it wouldn't be known. Or sometimes even the system, fostered it. So we now have the technology to be able to capture the consequences so that individuals, this is some of the most exciting stuff happening on the planet, where individuals, corporations, and nation states that do well to the larger common good benefit. And the more good they do, the more they benefit. So they're incentivized to do as much good as possible. And individuals, corporations, and nations that disregard or harm the common good are taxed or penalized, or there's moral strictures, so that it's in their self-interest to do the right, just, ecological thing, and it's also in their self-interest to not do the unjust, unecological thing. See, what this does is it makes it so that the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do becomes the right thing to do. Right now, the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do is usually the wrong thing to do. So these are the two I call it systemic piety. In fact, let me tell you this one story, and I'll kind of wind it down here. Just last week, I finished, actually 2 weeks ago today, I finished doing a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat with my son. And I had one of the most moving experiences of my life. Because my son is 30 years old, and the most meaningful spiritual practice of my life, I would say. In fact, somebody asked me this about a year ago. They said, what spiritual practices have you used that you found particularly valuable? And this memory popped into mind. And it wasn't a spiritual practice in a conscious sense, but it totally was. Which is from the time my son was about a year and a half until he was like 6.5 or 7, we had this little game that we played. We call it our breathing meditation. And I had a lazy boy recliner. And when we were both awake, we'd run to the lazy boy recliner, say, breathing meditation, and we'd lay down, and I would lay down, and he would lay face down on my chest. Now, of course, I couldn't keep pace with his breathing, but we would breathe together, and I would actually consciously say to myself, I did this every time for like 5.5, 6 years, where I said, if I never feel his body on mine like this again, because at some point, it's not cool to lay on your dad, right? So I knew that this was going to be passing, right, So I said, if I never feel his body on man like this again, I just want to memorize this. And I would feel his body, and I would try to memorize the feeling, right? My son introduced me to Vipassana meditation. Okay? He's done 4 retreats, 10-day retreats before. He and his fiancée were both there. This was her first time and my first time, so we got to commiserate together, right? Sitting 10 hours a day for 10 days. It was a stretch, right? But where this was at was 29 Palms, California. I was born in 29 Palms, California. I haven't been back there in 57 years. In fact, I only figured this out about day 4 of this 10-day silent retreat. All of a sudden I realized, wait a second. My mother and father lived here 9 months before. I was conceived roughly February 19th. I was there this year, February 19th, 58 years. This was my conception that my mother said I was born on my due date. So here I was in 29 Palms, California, where I was conceived. My son is introducing me to this whole week of paying attention to my breathing. And I felt this almost tsunami of grace wash over me. I cried so much the next few days just feeling this grace of our time. Yes, it's perilous. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's terrifying. But it's also, we're awash. We're neck deep in grace. And those of us who have done the heart work to interpret reality so that our thinking helps us live in right relationship to reality, we can be a blessing to those who haven't gotten there yet, who maybe are just scared or grieving or angry or whatever. I mean, if the Donald Trump phenomenon is anything, it's the fact that there's so many people that are just pissed off that the world's not supposed to work like this, and maybe he can fix it. I don't want to go there, but I will say this, that we need conscious people to be a blessing to others who perhaps haven't had the fortunate opportunity to work on their conscious self and who are going to be freaking out in the months and years to come. So again, I'll share a lot more on this at 1 o'clock, but I want to just wind this down and invite us all to consider how we might individually and collectively help others come into right relationship to God, to reality. And in so doing, work together of people of very different backgrounds, beliefs, philosophies, theologies. We don't have to agree on all that stuff. Because it's the evidential reformation. It's what God's revealing through evidence that can unite us. And there are major people, not just Michael Dowd, Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama, the Patriarch Bartholomew. These are massive, important global leaders that are really leading the way into this evidential reformation where we value evidence as modern-day scripture, that facts are God's native tongue. 2017 is the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther attacking the theses on the door of Wittenberg. The Protestant Reformation began 500 years ago next year. I suggest that we are now at the birth of the evidential Reformation. That whether we wear green clergy shirts or not, we're committed to a healthy relationship to nature and the future. In fact, I think one of the reasons why my book was endorsed, my book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, as well as by hundreds of religious leaders. And I think the reason is because there's this hunger of people across the philosophical religious spectrum of a message that's bridge building, where it's not science or religion, but it's science and religion like a spiral, blessing us and helping us be a blessing to the future. Because that's really what I think it's about. It's all of us becoming a blessing to future generations, and doing so with this sense of really becoming Christians, saviors of the future. And it's a terribly exciting time. And these 10 commandments are the heart of what God's telling us. That's giving us crystal clear guidance, as crystal clear as any guidance that's ever been received in the past. And these aren't just my words. This is collective intelligence from humanity. So again, I'll share that at 1 o'clock. If you know that you can't be here at 1 o'clock, you've already got a commitment or whatever, as you can see, Connie and I are pretty evangelistic about this. In fact, I was told that I was a cross between Carl Sagan and a Pentecostal preacher. Works for me, you know? Neil deGrasse Tyson and a Pentecostal preacher, hey, I'm right there, right? And so if you know that you can't be here, we have 3 DVDs. We give people the rights to make copies of our DVDs. You can burn as many copies as you want. But we have a thumb drive, a little flash drive that has all the contents of our DVDs, plus about 15 hours of other programs on climate change and sustainability. So a lot of people don't know how to make copies of DVDs, but anybody can loan somebody a thumb drive, flash drive. They download the contents to their computer, loan it to somebody else. And so you can share this perspective with your friends and neighbors and relatives very, very inexpensively with this little flash drive. So if you know you can't be here at 1 o'clock, I encourage you to check that out. I'd like to conclude with my favorite one-line piece of scripture from Carl Sagan. Science is at least in part informed worship. Science is at least in part informed worship. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So it's time for prayer for our spiritual mind treatment. I invite the practitioners to come forward, stand in the front, hold space for us as we go into that moment, into that truth, into that place of centering, into that awareness of the divine, and knowing that there is only one life. That life is that life of God, that divine expression, that center of all that is, that creates out of itself and its glory and its grace and its good, expanding ever into that knowing that is all love. It is that highest unconditional positive regard that is only that well-being of order and truth and good. Knowing that that essence is carried forth into every individual, every space, every moment in time, that it's all God, no matter what the appearance. We recognize that that thing is within each individual. It is within this planet, the universe, the stars. And yes, there is no separation between this and that. There is nothing that is in that truth of duality. There is nothing that separates every living thing from the planet. It's all one. And as we grow and expand and awaken at this time in life and the information that has come to us today through that grace of spirit and that synchronicity of wanting to learn this, we are blessed with this information. We are blessed with this music today, the angels that sing and bring all of this into that centering. And how good it is. We keep in mind that mental equivalent that there is only one life. We keep in mind that truth, that everything that comes into our awareness brings us to a place of healing, brings us to a place of revealing the truth, that life is ever expanding despite appearances. We know that in our teaching that there is not judgment. There is not a place to say this is bad and this is good, but that it's all of the essence of the one. Because even what appears to be something that is tearing us apart is actually that part of God that is a catalyst, that is working in its place in the scene, working in its place to awaken those that want to be awakened, that want to be jolted. So we say yes to all that is God. Let it come forward. Let it jolt us. Let it move us in our seat. Let it rock our feet and our foundation to take in what is good today, to let God show up in everything. And so knowing this is good, acknowledging the breath and the word and the spirit that comes forth in every teacher, every faith leader that is upon this planet today, we say yes because it all leads to that one mountaintop, that place that we know is the divine. And so with absolute gratitude filling and overflowing in each heart in this space, allowing the vibration to move, we say yes. We release it into that law, that mechanics that makes it so. And grounding this together, letting it touch our hearts and releasing it into that law, into the hands of God. Together we say, and so it is.